What up, fam? Welcome back to 88-Bit Tech. I'm AJ, and today we are nearing the middle of 2026, and we're well into the DDR5 RAM crisis. Prices are still crazy right now. They've dropped a little bit. It's still, for a lot of people, DDR5 builds are not within reach. Unless you're in the US, where you can get some pretty ridiculous bundle deals, where the DDR5 RAM is thrown in there with a CPU and a motherboard combo, ends up being quite a good deal in those particular scenarios. Outside of that, it's almost impossible to find reasonably priced DDR5. Not almost impossible, it is. Just to put into perspective, if I were to Google 16 gigabyte DDR5 RAM right now here in Sydney, Australia, the cheapest kit that I could find was a Crucial DDR5 UDIM kit, 5600 megatransfers per second, CL46 timing for 300 AUD. And that's a crazy markup for a 16 gigabyte kit. You can find some cheaper DDR5 SODIMM, a single stick of 16 gigabyte of laptop RAM for DDR5. The cheapest I found was $250. A lot of other tech reviewers have shown that DDR5 doesn't take as substantial of a hit in performance in gaming running single channel. That's definitely one way you can save money here, is just getting a single stick of 16 gigabytes and then hopefully getting another one when you can afford it or when prices come down a bit. However, it's definitely not ideal. Now, back in December, as prices were starting to skyrocket, I did have some foresight that the prices would continue to increase, so I did end up buying one single kit of 16 gigabyte SODIMM DDR5. I paid, back in December of 2025, $97, so under $100 for a kit of 5600 SODIMM DDR5, which is pretty good, all things considered, because right now it costs 3 times as much to get a similar capacity kit new. You might find some stuff off the used market, but even then the prices there are crazy as well. Nobody's parting ways with their DDR5 at reasonable prices, unfortunately. Luckily, I did pick up some DDR5 5600 RAM. The JEDEC timings on here are CL46. Not the best timings at all, but it is SK Hynix, which, generally speaking, SK Hynix works really well with overclocking. However, I don't know how true that is when I'm going to be throwing it into a SODIMM to UDIMM adapter. I got this set of UDIMM to SODIMM adapters off of AliExpress for 36 AUD, which is roughly 25 Australian dollars. So basically, I got a DDR5 kit for $136. Not too bad, considering that it is at least dual channel, but we'll see what kind of performance we can get out of this and whether or not it is actually viable. And I know it's pretty late in the game for me to get around to testing these, but I've been quite busy. But we're here now. Let's get to testing. So we've got this SK Hynix RAM paired with a Ryzen 5 7500F, an RTX 5060 8GB on a B650M motherboard from Maxon. Alrighty, so we have launched the PC with the SODIMM adapter. So we're running laptop RAM. As you can see in Task Manager here, we have form factor SODIMM 2 of 2, and in stock settings it defaults to 3200 megatransfers per second. So this is a DDR5 kit running DDR4 speeds stock, which is really weird. And the timings aren't even good for like a DDR4 kit. As you can see with the CPU-Z here, we are getting CL26, 26, 26, 52. These are pretty bad timings, even by DDR4 standards. but this is its stock, so we're gonna go ahead and test its stock. But let's very quickly check out what the JDEC spec on this RAM kit is. It is a SK Hynix die, which is actually really good to see, because SK Hynix is known to be very good in terms of overclocking. So I will do that, see if I can fine tune this. But apparently the JDEC specification to be able to run at 5600 megatransfers per second is at CL46, 45, 90. So not the greatest timings on this at all, but it is SK Hynix, so I'm sure I could get that down with some fine tuning. It's going to take several hours, probably, maybe even a couple of days to do this, but it's going to be worth it. After several hours of testing over a couple of days, I have been able to fine-tune the RAM to the best that I could get out of it. Unfortunately, I could not get 5600 megatransfer speeds to work. However, I have been able to fine-tune the timings and the speed to 5400 megatransfers per second with a timing of 32, 38, 38, 78, and 110. Coming from the best JDEC timings according to CPU-Z, which is CL46, running at 5600 megatransfers per second, so down to CL32. So not too bad at all. This is obviously a very large boost over what this is initially at stock with these adapters. Still find it really strange that it defaults to 3200 megatransfers per second, but here we are. So now that I have stable timings and the best speed that I can get, let's get into some game testing with the SODIMM adapter for this desktop computer. We're going to be testing this DDR5 kit at stock, which is 3200 megatransfers per second at CL26, to my refined tuning of CL32 at 5400 megatransfers per second. Let's get into it. First up, we have Baldur's Gate 3. In the blue, we have the 3200 megatransfer stock settings at CL26, and in the red, we've got the fine-tuned settings, the 5400 megatransfers per second at CL32. Baldur's Gate, we are running 1440p native resolution with ultra settings and DLAA for the anti-aliasing. With these particular settings, we did average 82 FPS with a 1% low of 48 and a 0.1% low of 43 with the stock RAM settings. And with the tune settings, we did get 84 average FPS, which was a 2.4% increase, but a much larger increase in the 1% lows, going from 48 to 52, an 8.3% increase. But in the 0.1% lows, we did see a minor regression. However, this could be margin of error. Quite surprising how little of a difference there was here. I really expected the fine-tuned timings to have a greater difference compared to the stock settings with this particular kit. But it really wasn't all that massive. Except in the 1% lows, I think 8.3% is a pretty substantial gain. So you are going to have a smoother experience overall. Next up, we have Clair Obscur Expedtion 33 in 1440p, running DLSS4 balanced with the Epic preset with the 3200 megatransfer RAM kit. So in this game, we basically saw no difference between the two different kits and speeds and timings. A bit strange, but with an open world game like this, I would have expected there to be a much larger difference, but I guess RAM just doesn't affect this particular title all that much. At least in my testing, that's what it showed. So yeah, you'd be fine running stock here in this particular case. I mean, technically there is a 50% increase to the 0.1% lows, but that 0.1% low in this game happens really just as you enter battles, and that's kind of just the way this title is. Every time you enter a battle, you're gonna get some dips in the FPS. That's just Unreal Engine 5 for you in Expedition 33. Moving on to a game where we did actually finally see a decent increase in our percent low values. We have Counter-Strike 2 at 1080p Pro settings. With the 3200 Mega Transfer Kit, we did average 300 FPS with a 1% low of 113 and a 0.1% low of 88. With the 5400 Mega Transfer tuned frequency and timings, we did average 308 FPS, which was a 2.7% increase. In the 1% lows, we got 124 average, which was 9.7% increase. And in the 0.1% lows, we got 98, which was a 11.4% increase over the 3200 Mega Transfer speed and timings. So you will get a decent boost if you tune your SODIMM RAM just a little bit. Moving on to Crimson Desert at 1440p, DLSS 4.0 set to balanced. On the cinematic preset, with the stock configuration, we averaged 68 FPS with a 1% low of 50 and a 0.1% low of 43. With the tuned SODIMM kit, we averaged 70 FPS, which was a 2.9% increase, a 1% low of 53, 6% increase, and a 0.1% low of 49, which was a 14% increase over the stock configuration. So in this title, you do get a decent boost in the lows if you're willing to spend the time to get the best configuration possible. Of the games I tested, Cyberpunk 2077 is the only one with a built-in benchmark, so I did want to test that. I actually ran it 5 times and got the averages just to see what we get in a synthetic benchmark. We are running 1440p, DLSS 4.5 in ultra performance, so this is preset L, with ultra settings and all RT options turned on to the lowest possible settings. No path tracing, but we are running it pretty high-end specs right now. And with the stock configuration, we did average 79.6 FPS with a 1% low of 50.8 and a 0.1% low of 41.6. With the tuned configuration, we did get 85.6% average FPS, which was a 7.5% increase over stock. In the 1% lows, we hit 59.4, which was a 16.9% increase. And the 0.1% lows got 49.4 average FPS, which was an 18.8% increase. So at least in synthetic benchmarks, we see a huge difference in the overall FPS gain, even in your just normal average FPS. But what is it like real world? Let's take a look. Unlike the built-in benchmark, there's going to be a lot more variety from run to run in a real world scenario. So I tried to get this as close as possible, but you know, when you're doing battles and shootouts and NPCs, there's tons of NPCs, things going on. It's going to be different from run to run. And I only tested it once per configuration. So, you know, take this graph for what it is, but yeah, it's not going to be a one-for-one comparison like a synthetic benchmark. However, we are still running the same exact settings as before. We're at 1440p, DLSS 4.5 ultra performance, ultra settings with all RT on, and no path tracing. With the stock configuration, we averaged 68 FPS with a 1% low of 40 and a 0.1% low of 23. Going to the tuned configuration, we did average 76 FPS, which was an 11.8% increase in the averages. We did get an average 1% low of 43, which was again a 7.5% increase, which is pretty decent. However, we did see a regression, albeit only 1 FPS, in the 0.1% lows, going from 23 to 22, which is a 4.3% reduction. However, 1 FPS, especially in a live scenario like this, I would attribute it to margin of error. So it's probably break even in terms of the 0.1% lows. However, the other two values are high enough where it's a decent amount better, especially in the averages. So it looks like that synthetic benchmark doesn't correlate to real world performance, but it does give you an idea, I guess, in that particular scenario how it'll work, but in real world it's not like that at all. It's still interesting to see what kind of differences we can get with these two different configurations, especially with the type of style of test that you're gonna do. Anyway, yeah, cool. On to the next game. Last but not least, we have Starfield running at 1440p DLSS 4.5 ultra performance with the ultra settings. I thought this would be a good game to test, especially since they recently had a bunch of updates as well as some DLCs, Terran Armada, so I figured it would be a good game to chuck in to this suite and see how it performs, especially since it's quite an open world game. The first thing I noticed when playing with the new updates and Terran Armada expansion or DLC is that the movement speed of your jetpack just feels way more intuitive and way more sensitive. So it feels like you just have way more mobility than before, whereas like it felt much more sluggish. Now it feels awesome. I actually quite love it. But anyway, let's get into the performance. Unfortunately, with this particular title, once again, it seems like the RAM didn't play much of a role here, or at least these particular speeds and timings. With the stock configuration, we averaged 61 FPS with a 1% low of 36 and a 0.1% low of 8. With the tuned configuration, we did get an average of 63 FPS, which was a 3.3% increase. 1% lows were the same, and the 0.1% lows were basically the same margin of error. It means a 4.3% difference, but 8 to 9 FPS, you're not going to notice that at all. In fact, you're not going to really notice much of a difference between these two different RAM configurations in general. Yeah, I'm quite surprised at how little of a difference running 3200 megatransfer RAM of DDR5 did versus 5400 megatransfer RAM. CL26 versus CL32, it was fairly similar across the board, at least in these games I tested. Maybe I need to test a couple more, but the biggest takeaway is the SODIMM kit of RAM works with the UDIMM to SODIMM adapters. Pretty awesome, and definitely a way for you to save some money in a DDR5 platform or build. But as of right now, DDR5 is still pretty much out of reach for the majority of people. Like I said, I bought this DDR5 SODIMM kit in December, and it was already, it was a 16 gigabyte kit, 5600 megatransfers, and it cost $100 to get it to me. Then I had to pay another $30. This is in AUD, so 130 total, but 130 AUD total, and still that was quite a lot for this type of for laptop RAM. Not going to sugarcoat it. I don't think DDR5 RAM is going to be going down anytime soon to any reasonable amount of pricing. And my educated guess is going to be a couple of years before we see any price reduction in RAM. And it's not consumer purchases that are driving the price up. It's multi-billion-dollar companies that are buying up all the RAM. So unless you tell them to stop buying all the RAM, I don't see prices coming down anytime soon. And that's the unfortunate truth of it. So, but yeah, pretty interesting results, I guess. Hopefully it was helpful to somebody out there. But yeah, it does improve 1% lows, as is usually the case when you're looking at RAM rather than overall average FPS. Well, that's it for now, guys. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.